I'm gonna go back. Yeah. I know her.
Called everybody?
I think so. I didn't know that there was. Oh, I thought there was one in here. No, yeah, it has to be on the top and in the middle. You've got hymn books, Bibles, templates. Well, that kind of makes sense.
All right, yeah, Diane called, said, I think I'm gonna be late. You go to Sunday school, hobby. No, that's great. I'm still trying to make it.
Send David an email. This is, the guys, meeting.
Good series this year, right? So I've been nice on really nice job. Capital office graduation day. Everybody's here on time.
So people.
Yeah.
I need to talk to
Good morning, everyone. The Lord be with you. Thank you all for coming on time for the last Summer Adult Forum of the summer. There's no Sunday school next week, and then in 2 weeks is the kickoff for the fall and the Adult Ministry Fair. There are handouts. We can run them to you if you don't already have them. Let me see if there's other announcements. Today's speaker is Bill Gibbons from Church. He's held many positions in city, county, and state government. Currently, he's the executive director of the Public Safety Institute at the University of Memphis, and he's the president of the Memphis Shelby Crime Commission. If we're ready, let's pray. Almighty God, you call us to bring justice and peace. Please light our way so that we all may live together in this great city. In Jesus' name, amen. And I can run some more handouts.
Snuck in on us here. Okay, I'm told that we start on time and we end on time. So what I'm going to try to do is spend about 25 minutes trying to do three things. Number one, kind of talk about the latest crime stats and what they indicate. Number two, talk a little bit about the Crime Commission, what it does. And then number three, talk about some best practices that we know will work. And we're trying to apply them here in Memphis, but we got some bumps in the road. So that's what I hope to do in about 25 minutes, and then have Q&A for 20 minutes or so, and then we're out of here at 9:45, right? And there are various people coming in, including my son and daughter-in-law, who don't have the handouts. So you'll just have to get them afterwards, I guess. I don't know. So you had the handout that gives you some of the latest crime stats. The good news is that compared to the first half of last year, we are down in every major category of crime with one exception. The one exception is domestic violence, which is up a little bit, about 2%, maybe not statistically significant, I don't know. But we're down in every category. Murders, rapes, aggravated assaults, robberies, vehicle thefts, burglaries, other felony thefts. That's encouraging. In terms of the violent crime, the real driver in that reduction is about a 25% reduction in reported robberies. So that's kind of driving it down. The overall reduction in violent crime is 5%. So you may wonder, well, if we have a reduction in reported robberies of 25%, why is the violent crime rate only down 5%? The way we calculate it, which is the same way that the TBI and the FBI calculates it, is it's an aggregate number. So we add up the number of murders, rapes, aggravated assaults, and robberies, and come up with the rate per 100,000. So when you look at it that way, it's the aggravated assaults that drive the number. Over 80% of our reported violent crimes are aggravated assaults. So until we can reduce the number of aggravated assaults significantly, we're always going to be pretty high in terms of our violent crime rate. Probably more than you want to know. But in terms of major property crime, that reduction is driven by a 30% reduction in reported vehicle thefts, which is very, very encouraging. So hopefully we can kind of keep that trend going. In your handout, you also have, well, you have charts reflecting all of that. Pete?
Can I ask a question?
No.
Could you define aggravated assault, please?
Aggravated assault is an assault with a deadly weapon. Now, interestingly, and Judge Smith knows this very well, there are aggravated assaults and there are aggravated assaults. If I point a gun at you, that's an aggravated assault. On the other hand, if I drive down the interstate firing a gun at cars, or if I drive through a neighborhood firing a gun at houses, that's an aggravated assault too. So it's a very broad spectrum. Good question.
How about domestic and violence? If that involves a gun or a threat, is that, which is it called?
You're getting to the next chart I want to point out. You also see some charts in here that show the growth in the number of violent incidents involving firearms. We just have a proliferation of firearms in our community. Frankly, and maybe we'll have time during the Q&A on this, I think some actions by the legislature have not been very helpful on that. But you'll see that in terms of all the reported violent incidents in the city of Memphis this year, a little over 70% involve firearms. If you go back 10 years ago, it was less than 50%. So we have this proliferation of firearms and violent incidents. And if you look at domestic violence, you'll see that in terms of aggravated assaults involving domestic violence, over half involved firearms. That was about 30% if you go back 10 years ago. So we're seeing that proliferation as well. So obviously guns have become the weapon of choice in terms of violent crime, which makes those violent crimes that much more dangerous. Going back to ag assaults, Keith, an ag assault can become a murder within a second. All it takes is a good aim. So the fact that we have so many aggravated assaults involving firearms is a real concern. You will see that while we've had a reduction compared to the first 6 months of last year, we are still above the level during the pandemic years of 2020, 21, 22. And it's not on the charts, and it's my fault, I should have included. If you go back to the pre-pandemic year of 2019, we are still way above that level. And it's my fault that I didn't put that on the chart, but I'll just give you an example. For the first 6 months of this year, the violent crime rate was basically 982 violent crimes per 100,000. If you go back, 1,280 violent crimes per 100,000. If you go back to 2019, it was 982. In terms of property crime, this year, 3,587 per 100,000. If you go back to 2019, 2,976. So we have a long way to go just to get back to the pre-pandemic level. But the good news is we're moving in the right direction. Any questions on that before we keep going? Yes, David?
What's the borderline distinction between aggravated assault and attempted murder?
Great question.
Just
David.
pointing the gun, or do you have to fire it?
And it's to a large degree kind of a judgment call. I mean, I'll give an example, which I think is probably correct. If I drive through a neighborhood just firing at houses, that's an aggravated assault. On the other hand, if I've got someone targeted in a specific house and I'm trying to hit that individual, I would argue that's an attempted murder. So, but it's a judgment call.
So what happens when you fire randomly into a house and hit someone and either injure them or kill them?
Well, at that point, that becomes a murder, probably a second-degree murder, because it's not premeditated, so to speak. But again, that's kind of a judgment call. Now, yeah.
Do you have more, when somebody does a drive-by, do they generally know the people they're trying to shoot, or are they just being?
It really depends. I mean, sometimes it's retaliatory, and they know that somebody, is in a house that's maybe related to someone. So it really just kind of depends. So let me move on. I'm trying to save time for Q&A at the end. So what is the Crime Commission, and why do we have it? The Crime Commission goes back to 1996. I had just become DA. Mayor Harrington was the mayor at the time. And we had a real spike in violent crime in 1996. There was a lot of concern, a lot of wringing of hands by elected officials and by the business community and others. And we took a look at what other cities are doing. We went to some other cities to talk about what they're doing. Chicago, Kansas City, and New Orleans all had standalone crime commissions, independent of government, really designed to kind of call it like they saw it, and to identify best practices to reduce crime. So we decided to create the Crime Commission as a standalone 501c3 nonprofit, totally dependent on private funding, so we're not beholden to any level of government. And it's really for the purpose of identifying best practices that seem to work, at least in other cities. Some very good things came out of the Crime Commission early on. Judge Smith, I hate to keep mentioning you, but you are aware of the drug treatment court that Idlewild's been involved in. That was created back in 1998 through special legislation that we had passed as the Crime Commission best practice. Also creation of the domestic violence court. You keep hearing up to today the figure that we need 2,500 police officers. That goes back to a 1998 best practice study by the Crime Commission, and that figure's been used ever since. So we were rocking along, and things were going pretty well. And then in 2006, we had another serious spike in crime, especially violent crime. And Will, I don't know if you remember this, but we were helping you move into your dorm on a Sunday afternoon in 2006, and I got a frantic call from then Mayor Horton saying, I can't go to the grocery store or to Walgreens without being accosted by somebody saying, what are you going to do about crime? We got to do something. So I said, well, I'll be back in Memphis tomorrow when you want to meet. He said, tomorrow morning. want to meet tomorrow. And I said, well, can I bring Sheriff Luttrell along with me? He said yes. So the three of us met, and it took us about 5 minutes to figure out that we need a plan and we need to work the plan. But it doesn't need to be the DA's plan or the mayor's plan or the sheriff's plan. It needs to be a community plan. And we quickly decided that the Crime Commission was kind of the neutral party to oversee development of the plan. And that was done. We had a crime summit in 2006. About 400 people attended. Maybe some of you were there. And out of that came the first 5-year Safe Community Plan. We're in now the 4th Safe Community Plan. And some good things came out of that pretty quickly. Creation of the Family Safety Center to help victims of domestic violence get through a very Byzantine system. Creation of the multi-agency gang unit so that various law enforcement agencies are working a little more closely together to tackle the crime problem. A program called Safeways, which really focuses on crime prevention in large apartment communities. Some of you probably heard of crime prevention through environmental design. That's a key part of that. Trying to make sure that that's applied in our apartment communities. So some good things came out of that. So basically what we've done is take these best practices and rather than having them in silos, put them within the umbrella of a common plan. Does that make sense? The current plan is 56 pages long, and you can go to the Crime Commission website at memphiscrime.org and read all 56 pages while you're watching the Olympics, or you can take the ClickNote version here and take a look at it. What I would like to do is now go through some of the things in the current plan. Again, best practices that we know will work if they are implemented correctly, they are brought to scale, and they are sustained over time. Those are big ifs. And I'm going to be honest with you this morning in terms of kind of where we stand on some of these. First one is called focused deterrence. It's worked very well in other cities. It was first tried really in the city of Boston in the mid-1990s with great success. It's been tried in other cities as well. Right now it's being tried in Detroit with a lot of success, New Orleans with a great deal of success, and we're doing it here. And it's really composed of kind of two parts. Number one is what's called call-ins. And here's how that works. The Department of Correction, the Tennessee Department of Correction, identifies individuals who are on probation or parole who are high risk. And these are individuals with a record. And they are called in to basically a meeting, just like we are here. And they are given a twofold message. Number one, we want to help you change your behavior. We want to help you move in the right direction. And there are various agencies here to help you, whether it's looking for a job or housing or whatever it is. And they're here, and then after the call in, there's an opportunity for those individuals to interact with those agencies. The other part of the message is if you decide not to change your behavior, we're going to do everything we can to hold you accountable. So it's kind of a carrot and stick approach. We've got that underway right now in Memphis. Last year, we had call-ins for about 120 high-risk individuals. That's continuing this year. It's being operated really by the city of Memphis. Mayor Young has bought into it. So I think that will continue. But there are some hiccups along the way, as you would expect. I don't think that we are doing as good of a job as we could to really track what these individuals are doing once they participated in the call-in. Are they picking up new cases? And are we flagging those cases to make sure that we mean it when we say we're gonna hold them accountable? So there are some things kind of slipping between the cracks there. And it takes someone kind of tracking these individuals every day and seeing if they picked up a new charge. So it's labor intensive. On the other side of the coin, I think we could be doing a better job of providing services to those individuals who want to change their behavior. So we're doing it, but again, probably not as intensively as we need to. So there's some issues with implementation, but Mayor Young is committed to continuing it, and I think it has a lot of promise. The other part of that does not involve people on probation or parole is called intervention. Intervention, but it's really what I'd call house calls. And these are individuals who are not on probation or parole, but they are identified by law enforcement as bad actors. And they kind of know who they are. So the way that works is there's a house visit, basically, by law enforcement and by some social service providers, and in many times by ministers who have been recruited to help on this. And they do a house call. And it's kind of the same drill with a dual message. We want to help you move in the right direction. But if you decide not to, we're going to do everything we can to hold you accountable. We know who you are. There were over 100 interventions last year, house calls, so to speak. So that's just another aspect of this. But again, I think the follow-through is important, tracking those individuals, seeing if they picked up any additional charges, and making sure they get the services that they say they want. And by the way, for those who participate in the call-in, and for those who get the, what I call house calls, they're technically called intervention engagements, which sounds nicer maybe. But over half say they do want some form of support services. So key is to make sure that those services are provided. So that's a best practice that is part of the Safe Community plan and has a lot of potential, but it's got to be implemented correctly, scaled up. Right now, it involves a couple of hundred per year. We need to get that up to have an impact. I don't know what the magic number is, but if we got it up to, say, 500, that could start having a significant impact. Another best practice that's worked in other cities that's part of the plan is called violence intervention. A lot of our violent crime in Memphis, especially these aggravated assaults, are retaliatory in nature. Someone did something to me, and I'm going to get back at him. So a lot of that's going on. And a lot of the drive-by shootings, as someone asked earlier, involve that. We've got an effort here in Memphis to address that problem. How many of you have heard of the 901 Block Squad? Some of you? Nobody? God. They've actually changed their name to Block Squad Memphis. But these are guys who are street smart. A lot of them have felony convictions, but they're out there in the street. So what the city did under Mayor Strickland was fund the Block Squad effort to go out there at street level and try to intervene to head off this retaliatory acts of violence. And they got up to 100 guys out on the street intervening. This was back in 2023. So they were very active. They intervened, we kind of keep this data, they intervened with over 3,000 individuals in 2023. And they had what they call about 9,000 touches. Touches means the number of times they intervene with somebody. So on average, say we're intervening 3 times with every individual that they contacted. Interestingly, over half of those individuals with whom they intervened were 17 years old or younger. So, have that going. But as I mentioned, it's all about implementation and bringing things to scale and sustaining. In April of this year, they ran out of money. All of the block squad individuals have been furloughed. So it's not going on right now. The city has indicated that it's going to provide additional funding, but government being government, it takes a while. But hopefully we'll be able to get that back on track. You know, these 100 or so interveners that they had, some were part-time, some were full-time, but basically all of them have been furloughed at this point. So that's an example of a best practice that has worked very well in other cities. But you got to implement it correctly, you got to scale it up, and you got to sustain it. So that's the real question that we face. Third example, I'm doing pretty well. I may get to a fourth example. Data-driven policing. When you think about it, it's kind of common sense, but making sure our police officers are in the right places at the right times to have the maximum impact. When you look at the charts that I gave you, you will see that the violent crime rate was the lowest in memory in 2011. That's when we had almost 2,500 police officers being deployed in a data-driven manner. We now have about 2,000 police officers, so we've had a net loss of 20% of the police force. The good thing is that the police department is still very committed to data-driven deployment. Chief Davis is very committed to it. You've probably heard about Code Zero. That's an example of data-driven deployment. But they don't have as many officers as we had in 2011 to do that. And we're spending about $25 million a year in city money, your money, my money, to provide overtime, just to cover the various precinct wars. So we got a problem. So we got to, again, the goal of the city of Memphis is 2,500 police officers. That's the official goal. And they're doing a lot of things to try to get there. They've raised the average salary for a beginning police officer. I think it's $54,000 now. There is also a $15,000 signing bonus. So they're providing these incentives. One thing that's in the Safe Community Plan that we pushed hard to get enacted, and we succeeded, was eliminating the residency requirement for police officers and firefighters, by the way. And we succeeded in doing that. Of the current recruits at the Memphis Police Academy, 22% live outside of Shelby County. So it is having a positive impact in terms of our ability to recruit more officers. But we have a long way to go there. But that's an example of a best practice that has worked here in the past, and it's also worked in other cities. I think I have time for one more, right? There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of concern about juvenile violence in particular. And I'm sorry, you're holding up a sign? Oh, I thought you were. Thought there was. I thought you were saying I'm out of time. This year we will have about 400 juveniles charged with serious violent crimes. Carjackings, robberies, aggravated assaults, murders. That does not reflect the total number of juveniles committing violent crime. That's just where someone has been apprehended and charged, okay? But about 400. Here's the reality of it. Most of those individuals are going to be supervised in the community. They are not going to a secure facility. The state of Tennessee has about 100 secure beds for violent juveniles statewide. Well, if you got 400 just coming out of Shelby County, you do the math, and it's very obvious that most are just going to be right back out in the community being supervised. What we need is intensive supervision and rehabilitation. Someone who is touching that young person every single day. And we've not had that. We are moving in that direction. We've gotten some funding through the state to start doing that. Some of you are probably familiar with youth villages, right? They are taking the lead on that in terms of providing that more intensive rehabilitation. And it's too early to tell what the impact's going to be. They just started this year, but I think it's very promising. Again, it's a best practice that has worked well in other cities. Another problem that's hopefully going to be addressed is the fact that under our juvenile system, any rehabilitation stops at that young person's 19th birthday. It's over. And frankly, they know it. So if you have a 17-year-old carjacker who really needs some pretty intensive rehabilitation for a period of time, when that 17-year-old carjacker reaches 19, the supervision, the rehabilitation ends. It's just over. We succeeded in passing legislation this year to lift that arbitrary 19th birthday limit for those most serious violent offenders. I think that can be a game changer. So we're not going to see the impact until a couple of years down the road, but I think that can make a major difference in terms of supervising those serious juvenile offenders, but also rehabilitating them, hopefully. So we'll see how that goes. Again, that's a best practice. About 20 states have the legislation that allows supervision beyond an offender's 19th birthday. It's called blended sentencing, but nobody knows what that is. But it's basically lifting that arbitrary 19th birthday limit. So those are examples of things that are in the plan that are proven best practices if implemented correctly, brought to scale, and sustained over time. And those are big ifs. And I think the verdict is still out on that in terms of our ability, our willingness to commit the resources to get that done. So with that, I said I would stop at about this time and take Q&A if there are any left. I don't know. Keith?
Bill, Katie and I walk our neighborhood 4 or 5 times a week. And we just noticed, I think in the past month or so, when we live in Simple Gardens, that.
I know that.
Yeah, I know you do. Police cars just placed in different, they're empty, but they're placed in different areas, which looks good. Is that a new practice?
Yeah, they decided to start doing that. It's kind of a deterrent. Hopefully it works. I don't know if it does or not, but it's just an example. You may also know that they decided to keep the blue lights on all the time.
Right.
Some people think that's a good move, some don't, I don't know. But that's just another example of trying to be a deterrent.
I want you to add something. Tell them about the composition of the board of the crime commission. 'Cause
Very good.
That's a big indicator.
Thank you very much.
The
Thank you very much. That's a very important point. Thank you. The crime commission board is made up of 50 people. It's kind of like herding cats and squirrels. But they all agreed on the safe community plan, unanimous. And it's made up of 25 public sector members and 25 private sector members. So you've got some obvious, you've got the city mayor, the county mayor, the police chief, the sheriff, the DA, the U.S. attorney, so on. And then you've got some private sector members, some business representatives, some faith community members, social service agencies. But it's really designed to have 50 key stakeholders all at the table trying to agree on what we need to do. And amazingly, it's worked pretty well. Thank you for asking that question.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
How are we doing at attracting state and federal funds for all these initiatives?
We could do better, but we are attracting state and federal funds. The focused deterrence effort, the violence intervention effort, that's federal funds. Now, it's federal funds that have run out. They were basically COVID funds. Mayor Strickland decided to use the special COVID funds to do that, so that's gone away. So it's going to be up to Mayor Young to decide whether or not to put some additional funds into that. I think he will. I think he will. We've received some state funds. The effort by Youth Villages that I mentioned, that is state funds coming into the city. They went to the police department, and the police department contracted with Youth Villages. Also, this is not money as such, but the state is committing more state troopers to Shelby County. There's a story I can tell about that, I guess, having overseen state troopers for a while. But we are up to 45 state troopers assigned to Shelby County right now. If you go back 2 years ago, it was like 15. So they have upped the number of state troopers. You see them on the interstate, and I've actually seen them on state highways that are streets in Memphis, Poplar Avenue, for example, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I think it's great to have their presence. There is a story behind why state troopers were not historically assigned to Memphis, and that is Memphis didn't want them. Up until Mayor Strickland, kind of the message was, don't come into Memphis, and frankly, it had to do about money. And who would get drug forfeiture funds when they stopped vehicles with drug money and so on. And so it was really kind of a competition among various law enforcement agencies. And so they said, well, we don't want the troopers coming in town, then the state gets the money rather than local law enforcement agencies. But Mayor Strickland understood the importance of having them. And really kind of change that mindset. And luckily, the state has responded to that. Keith, this is your third question.
What about preventative? I mean, we're talking about everything that's happening.
Yes, and I only had a limited amount of time. You'll see part of the plan is to increase funding for entities in town that seem to have a proven track record of effective prevention. And in particular, the plan mentions Boys and Girls Clubs as an example of that. In fact, at our last board meeting Thursday, Boys and Girls Club did a presentation. Their track record is very, very impressive. But there are other entities out there too, like the YWCA, Memphis Athletic Ministries. And so we're supporting increased funding for those kinds of efforts in order to reduce the number of young people who ever encounter law enforcement in the first place, much less juvenile court. So we need to support those kinds of efforts. And again, there's some with very good track records. We kind of latched on to Boys and Girls Clubs because they keep very good data. For example, of the seniors, the high school seniors, actively participating in Boys and Girls Clubs after-school programs, 100% graduated. And the vast majority are going to college, others going into the military, others in the workforce. But they've got a pretty impressive track record. They're not the only ones, but we need to really scale those efforts up and sustain them over time. Judge?
Just a question about your numbers. Are these numbers based on arrests?
No. The numbers you're looking at, if I see your page right, that's reported crimes.
Okay.
Reported crimes. Now, the juvenile number that I gave is based on arrests. I mean, when you think about it, You don't know, if someone robs you, you don't know if that individual is 16 or 18 for sure.
Would that
So
have
it's
a-
impossible to say, you know, X number of reported crimes were committed by people younger than 18. I mean, it's impossible to know.
So we don't know how many of these actually result in arrest or conviction. Do you keep those numbers as part of your data?
No, we don't. The solve rate is not as great as it needs to be. Especially if you're looking at aggravated assaults, it's down around 20 or 25%. It's pretty low. But there's a shortage of investigators in the police department, which is another example of the impact of shortages. Yeah.
As it relates to juvenile crimes, I think in school truancy a huge issue, and what can we do about that? Or what
Yes.
can be done about it?
We're having some great questions here. I'm getting a little off base here, but I am really impressed with our new school superintendent. She is a new member of the Crime Commission Board. And I didn't have to beg her to join. I met with her and she said, of course I want to be on that board. I understand the connection between some school issues like truancy and crime. She understands that. Our Thursday meeting was her first meeting, and she was very engaged. I think she's a game changer for Memphis. I really do. I hope she stays here. But, you know, we were talking about this, and, you know, she's been very transparent on the issue of kids skipping school. I mean, she's just kind of put it out there, which I think is good. And, you know, we talked about the fact that, you know, if you have a 15-year-old on a school day at 10 o'clock in the morning breaking into cars, almost by definition, he's truant, right? And so she understands the importance of addressing that. I think she's very open about it. Now, exactly what the answer is, I mean, she's only been here since April, so let's give her an opportunity to, but she understands the problem. The other thing she and I talked about was that during the pandemic, when the schools were closed, we had probably several thousand, at least, maybe more than that, kids just drop off the radar. They never came back. And so they're not even on the school rolls to be counted as truant. They're just out there. And I can't prove this, but I would argue that a lot of the car break-ins and car thefts and so on that we have occurring are probably being committed by those individuals who've just kind of dropped out. And we don't know how to track them. The school system doesn't know how to track them. But I'm very glad that she's being very open and transparent about that, and I think she's going to try to tackle it. Good question.
Question about gangs, sorry.
You're next.
Gangs, talk to us about that. Do you think it's a major issue with crime? What are we doing?
Yes, and Judge Smith, back when you were in the DA's office, we kind of had a gang structure, right?
Yes.
And we kind of knew what they were. You know, you had the gangster disciples, the Bloods and the Crips, and law enforcement kind of knew who the leaders were and could interact with them to some degree to kind of hit off things. Now it is totally splintered. That structure is not really out there anymore. So you've got 5 guys who decide they're going to be a gang, and they go out and start committing crimes. And they don't have the discipline that probably we used to have with the more structured gangs, which makes them in a lot of ways more dangerous, and it's tougher to get a handle of. So I guess it depends on how you define gangs, but in my mind, if 5 guys get together and decide to start breaking into cars, for all practical purposes, that's a gang. And the gang membership may shift from day to day and night to night, you know, but it's a big part of the problem, sure.
What can churches do?
Last question, I think.
What can churches do?
You talked about prevention earlier. I think that's one thing churches can do. You know, Idlewild's had a great reputation for many, many years, decades, of its outreach effort to help young people in particular move in the right direction. I mean, there was one time when we had probably the best church basketball program in the city, and we were known for that. I mean, people like Elliot Perry and so many others went through the Idlewild system. So I think continuing that effort as we are is very, very important. So I would say that's a big thing that the church can do and continue to scale it up. Scale it up. I do know also, and maybe some of you are involved in this, I think we've got some church members who are involved with the drug treatment court. Is anybody here?
Mental health court.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I had the wrong court, mental health court. So you're involved, what do you do exactly?
On the way down started, we tried to introduce ourselves to people, let them know that there are people in the community and not always just people in employment in the system, but people in the community that are interested in their well-being, and it seems to be quite effective.
Okay, good, good.
Excuse me, it's Thursday. I beg your pardon. It was Tuesday.
Are we done? I'm looking at,
4 minutes, but
one more question, I guess. Yeah.
As it relates to these stats and the data that you got, I mean, what is the percentage of repeat offenders versus new?
Good question. About 35%.
Are repeat offenders?
Yes, about 35%. And that's held steady for quite a while. Now, that's 35% within a 3-year period. That's the way the state tracks it. So they can be repeat offenders in year number 4 or something, and we don't catch that.
Do you know whether they're mostly supervised offenders versus ones that have been in jail?
I do not know that. No. I don't know. Well, if it's within 3 years, they're probably still going to be under supervision. Okay, I think time is up.
We're in the gym for church, so they want us to go this way.
I got it.
I can't help but thinking. I hated to miss your, I had a bridge term. I said I hated to miss your football thing. Yeah, we were. I have not coached. They only have twice a year. Just happened to be like that.
How many people come? I said, 20 to 30, we got a little breather.
Yeah, and the different personalities, the same person.
Thank you very much.
Certainly. Is that kind of typical?
I think we got more people than
I remember that memorandum of understanding saying that the troopers can't come into town and take our money.
But anyway, okay, I'm gonna get you.
I remember a trooper stopping me, like, it going into the Department of Safety, asking me, why are you using the Leave your money alone.
I remember, now all I remember was no matter what, I just remember to go.
Well, it's a different group. That means down like full 2%. Down like 1%. So what do we owe?
Because if you're only down.
The only thing we're up on is domestic violence, which is not counted as part of major
If we do the aggregate, right, that means we throw them all in a pile. And what is the average, right? Right. So we're down, if we take 25% out of that pot, and it's only down 5, that means something's up.
No, it's because when you add the ag assault was on the ground.
Oh, so each one gets a different.
Yeah, it's like
The
a
ag
weighted
assault makes
case.
it up.
Yeah, it's like the weighted, it's like a weighted case looks in front. Heard you talk about that.
While the rate of robbery is not that heavy compared to the others.
So many ag assaults.
Yeah.
Take it out.
The only way we're gonna get.
So my question was trying to focus on, like, you have to prosecute the police, but I was trying to do something. Figured you knew that I knew the answer to what I was asking. I'm commenting. Back in the day. Yeah, I almost had to interject. Yeah. At some point, I can't remember who did it. Somebody assigned us our individual gangs. Like I had the traveling busters. They were my gang, and so they knew me.
Good information.